So I think what you guys need to do, Uncle Bill and you and Dad, I think you guys need to get around here and you need to tell us some of the old history of when you guys was growing up, living on the farm, driving out here from Nebraska. So some of the younger generation hears it from the old folks.
How many cars did we bring out?
And that way it don't get lost.
How many cars came out? How many cars came out from Nebraska? What'd you see?
Right. A panel and a 1937 Ford car. What else?
Leonard. Well, what Leonard drive?
Leonard, what Leonard drive?
Leonard drove I think it was Chevrolet M12. And Chuck, Cliff, John running the panel, Dad pulling the trailer, and the 37 Ford. And us kids and Dad on the road to that. There were 3 vehicles that came. And then we left there on the 28th, I think was the 5th day of March.
And the roads were pretty much gravel. The roads were pretty much gravel.
A lot of gravel, yeah.
And when we got about 3 days out, we stopped. Billy, we let Dad let us little kids out. And you think Bill was going to get back in that car at 2 years old? He said, no way. So Dad says, okay. So he started driving. And there Bill stood waving at us. Bill's mother was just dying. Me and Bernie was too. And but Bill was sick and tired of that road trip, I'll tell you what. He didn't
How
like
many
it.
days did it take you to get here?
How many days? What, about 5 or 6?
And there and here,
How long did it take us to get here?
we left there the 28th of February and got here the 5th day of March. What day was it?
That's 7 days.
So Dad, why don't you come up here?
Lauren?
Now there's a second part to that story.
Yeah.
In that 3 months later, my dad and Uncle Chuck came back to marry their sweethearts in a double wedding, and they came out to Oregon in, I guess, 27th of July was their wedding anniversary, so I guess it was 28th of July. They all left Oregon, and lo and behold, who gets to be in the back seat of the car but Grandma on your honeymoon?
And she told us she did a lot of this.
Now, Mother had to go to sign for Dawn.
That's right.
That's the third lawyer in the picture. His dad is Dawn. And my mother had to go along so she could sign for Dawn to get married because he was too young legally to get married. 18, 19. About 18. They weren't very old.
How old were they?
I think about 18. Chuck must have been about 20. They were still not dry behind the ears yet. And then we had, after all those children were born, my mother had every child at home. 10 children at home. We lived about 8 miles out in the country from the little town of Bixby, Nebraska. And then after we came to Oregon, Mother got pregnant and had children. And she was the only child out of those 11 children that was born in a hospital, and the only child that my mother didn't nurse. I thought that was always interesting. We lived in a 4-room house in Nebraska, and we had what we called a bunkhouse. It was, I think it was all one room.
That was.
And the beds were set out there for all my brothers. And usually there was 2 or 3 cousins that came to live with us in the meantime. Or maybe a relative that had a boy got out in trouble like they do today. Some of them. And they would come live with us too. Mother would bake like 10 to 50 loaves of bread a day on a cob. Corn cob was our kind of heat that we used, was dried corn cobs.
Yeah, that's a fuel.
Huh?
That was a fuel for cook stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Christmas was very limited. I used to get a $1 bill to go get my dad and all my brothers a white handkerchief for Christmas because they were a nickel apiece. And that was what they got from me for Christmas. Everybody used handkerchiefs in those days. We never knew what a Kleenex was. So,
I'm going to read this, and you tell me what I'm reading because I don't know these people too. This is okay. My dad, Vern Charles Thackeray, was born August 10th, 1890. His dad was named Charles Thackeray. His mom's name was Maddie, and she was a twin. She died in 1892, 2 years after my dad was born. And they had a child named Nellie. She died 3 months after she was born. And my first aunt
had a child.
Maddie and Charles.
Yeah.
And they had 3 kids. The first one was Aunt Alice. Second one was Aunt Pearl. Third one was Dad, Vern, and the baby's name was Nellie. And Dad lived with J.B. Edwards, that's his grandfather on his mother's side, and his step-grandmother, and Vern didn't get along with them very well at all. Vern's father died when he was 10 years old, which would be 1900. He lived with the Thackeray's in Iowa when he was 12 and 13 years old. His uncles and aunts, and he made the trip back and forth and stayed with Pearl, his sister, off and on for a couple of years. He came back to Nebraska in 1912. Now the reason that's so important, because Ed may ask me, I wonder when Dad met Mom. There's the answer. He came back from Iowa in 1912. Mom and Dad first met in November, close to our farm, and where we lived before we come to Oregon. Now I got another document here, if I can find it. Okay. Mother was born in Beloit, Kansas, August 27, 1898. Her sister was Aunt Mary. She was born 4th of July, 1896, 2 years older than Mom. George Robert was born in 1872. That would have been her dad. Baker. And he had 4 wives. The first one name was Clara Bryant Baker. She died in 1899. Now that means Mother was only 1 year old. Right. His mom was born in 1898. Clara died in 1899. Second wife was Nellie Bryant, a first cousin to his first wife, and she died in approximately 1900. His third wife, we don't know her name, but her last name was Williams, and she moved at Beloit. I can't read Mom's writing. And the third wife was named Estella May Curtis, and she was born May the 5th of 1882. And Mother, Rob, Art, Les, Claude, Harvey, Opal, and Goldie were Mom's brothers and sisters. Now, here's a little trivia. Lorne was named after a cousin of mine. Mother wrote that. Ralph was named after a neighbor and a son, and was a real friend. Leonard was named after Dad's cousin. Chuck was named after both grandfathers. Donald was named after the governor of Nebraska. Leo Vern was named Dad's friend. Lauren after my cousin, Mother's cousin. Ralph was named after my cousin. Edna May, Dad named her after me. Eva Jewell was named because I love the name. Bernie, a neighbor of Dad's. Now I got one more document. And I was named after a cousin of Dad's and a friend. And Barbara, I named her because I liked the name. Yeah, and I found those just about a month ago.
You're right. I just thought I was named after
Is there any way
Lil.
you can make
Yeah.
copies
About
of
2 years.
that?
When you can
I said I was named after Lil. About
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, she wrote down Lauren was named after my cousin.
I never knew that either.
I just, when we go through
Bernie
that.
was named after a Patriot neighbors.
Yeah.
Bernard.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Tell us about when you first moved to Salem as a family and literally just getting a foothold in this area. Tell us what life was like trying to make a go of it with all these kids and daughter-in-laws trying to live in close
There's
proximity.
a lot of questions I don't have to answer. We got here on March of 1938, and we actually went to Rob Baker's place in Lebanon. And then the folks found a place in Salem out there, the Teal House is what they bought.
That's on Lancaster and Hayesville.
Right. And
Still there.
yeah, and Chuck and Don, they had got married, and they just around the corner, about a block or so, they bought a new house in there. And we worked odd jobs. Where we come from, there was no jobs. We worked George Bodenheimer.
Baling.
We'd go from farm to farm and bale hay. I was tying the wires on the bales. They run about 140, 50, 60 pounds. And 3 wires to a bale. And we'd put out 60, 70 ton a day. And I don't know what else.
I remember there was on Lake Labiche, it's onion
Yeah.
growers. And they worked on their knees hoeing weeding onions
With our fingers.
for 10 cents an hour.
Yeah.
And one day, my dad, of course, he had to have his horses, mules,
Mule.
and so he went to doing garden work,
Yeah.
doing people's garden.
Plowing and stuff.
Plowed, I can't get words today.
Yeah.
And one man said he didn't have any money, but he said, I grow potatoes, and if you would like to take your pay in potatoes, would that be fine? And of course, my dad says, of course, that's food for my family on the table. I mean, times were bad in those days. No kidding. We walked 1.5 miles to school. A lot of times we had our horses to ride. And our feet, our shoes, we get 2 a year, if I remember right. For Christmas and all the church and school plays, we'd have pretty shoes, nice shoes and nice clothing. And if they wore out before school started, we'd put cardboard in those holes so we could go through the sand and the sandburrs and the snow, whatever the weather happened to be. I think it was a privilege for me to live in those days and to know what it was like. I really do. I just appreciate everything I've got, and I don't have to
Oh, me
want
too.
nothing because I've got a roof over my head and clothes on my back, and I don't have to have a new outfit every time there's another day that's whatever it is.
I remember
Thankful.
Dad took a load of shelled corn to the elevator in Bickleman, Nebraska. It's the wintertime. There was no heater in the truck. We let my brothers Lil and I off at Fred Pringle's grocery store. They had a big pot-belly stove, stood that high and everything. Dad let us off, and he said, "You boys go in and get warm." And he gave us a dime. And I remember this to this day. He said, "That's the same amount of money that I'm getting for a bushel of corn."
Wow.
When I'm taking to the elevator. That's 56 pounds at a bushel.
Wow.
And you got 10 cents a bushel. And I also remember that same year, we'd sometimes buy a coal for heating out of Colorado, and my dad would burn ears of corn for fuel because he burned the corn cheaper than he could buy the fuel for coal.
Yeah.
And big old ears of corn like that. And so they had a hard time. But the best thing they ever done is when they moved to Oregon, because there was absolutely no jobs back there in Nebraska. Everybody's farmers, that sort of thing. We got out here and my gosh, we could take berries, we could do anything. Well, there was, whenever I was tying hay bales, wires, we was getting 25 cents an hour, you know. And when we weeded onions, we was getting something like 15 cents an hour on our hands and knees. And the little Japanese ladies was out there, grandmas, and they just walk away from us like that because they can go so much faster, you know. Yeah, that was right there at Lake LaVish. Right where the highway goes, right across on the left-hand side going south. That's where they raise a lot of celery out there. Yeah. So I worked the onions, all of that. So I feel very fortunate and proud of what I've got today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the folks brought us out here, give us an opportunity to find work, and it was a good move that he made for all of us kids.
So tell us a little bit about farming back there with the mules and how Granddad raised his own mules.
Dad raised his own mules. He was a good-sized farmer. He'd usually run about 2,500 acres of corn, plus other crops. And he'd run probably a couple of hundred head of cattle. And in the summertime, they would take the cattle and drive them up into the sand hills, probably 20 miles north, and hire somebody to watch over the cattle, plus not only Dad's cattle, but two other cousins, I think they were of Dad's, and they had their cattle, and they'd send them up there. And before they took them up there, they would have a brand they'd put on their hip here. I remember my dad's brand is V-Bar T. That was registered in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so when they went back in the fall to bring the cattle back, drive them back, of course a lot of the cows was having calves. So whatever calf went with that cow, and that cow was branded, that calf belonged to that person. Yep.
I remember times were so tough. My dad borrowed money from the bank, and that was just great. Well, my father-in-law there joined us in the back kitty corner, and he needed some money, but he didn't really have that many cattle enough to get very much money borrowed. So my dad says, all right, Roy, I'll run my cattle over, drop the fence, and we'll run the cattle over to your farm. So that's what he did, enough that my father-in-law then could go to the same banker and borrow money.
So the same cattle were.
So they mortgaged.
Our cattle over to Roy's farm.
And that same letdown we had on that pasture, the pasture was probably 400 acres. And 3 barbed wire fence. And Roy Barger's wife was in the hospital at Imperial. And Roy's corn was just up like that, you know. And here he's up there 40 miles from home. His corn's growing and his meat is cultivated and everything. And I remember that we went with, I think, 3 outfits of ours, or 4. I remember I was on one of them, and I just little guy, probably 7. And we went up there and let the fence down, went in, and cultivated all Roy's corn. And the neighbor seen us over there working, Doan Warnick, and he came over with his cultivator, and in 2 days we had all Roy's corn all cultivated. When he got home from the hospital,
You couldn't believe it, huh?
yeah, It was all taken care of. That's what they did. Neighbors back there help each other. Yeah.
If they butchered a cow or a hog or whatever,
Yeah.
also shelling corn and whatever the crop was, all the guys in the neighborhood would bring their rigs and help do whatever had to be done, and the women would make dinner for all of those people.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, they made it on these old wooden, or not wooden back there, corncob stoves, like the old-fashioned burning stoves of today. And that's all they'd bake and everything for all those, maybe what, 10 or 15 men at least, many times I can remember. Not very old, I was only 10 when I left there, but I've got a memory that never will fade me, I don't think. And the other thing we had was, you know, nowadays the kids all have their little telephones and their little gizmos and computer stuff. We had a phone on the wall, long was for the, just kept ringing, was for the operator,
Yeah.
if she would ever answer. And then everybody had 2 longs and a short, or
ring
3
too long.
shorts, or whatever, you know, to answer. Well, when that telephone rang, everybody ran to the phone to listen, and that's how we would learn if anybody had a new baby, or if anybody had a fight last night, or anything news. That was our communication in those days. And then everybody in the neighborhood knew when you woke up and you went to bed. A little too much information for what it is today.
And with who?
Talking about helping Roy Barger, when we got ready to have a farm sale back there in 38, my dad had bought a new tractor, F-30 McCormick Dairy, and he and Roy Barger wanted to buy it, but he had to go to the bank. And the banker says, Roy, you just don't have enough collateral. So they left the bank. The day before the sale, my dad had my brother Leonard drive that tractor, park it into Roy Barger's driveway, and Roy come down and said, Vern, I can't buy that tractor. Dad said, you paid for it. If you ever get a crop, you can pay me.
Yeah.
And he did. And eventually, he moved to Oregon. And his oldest son married my daughter.
Yeah.
My
Her
sister.
sister.
I won't say it more, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, my husband had a brother by the name of Lyle. They were just the same age for 2 days. And this is how good those people were to each other. You probably a lot of them know what I'm going to say. My mother had me, Lyle was born in April of 13. I was born May the 8th. My mother-in-law didn't have enough milk to nurse Lyle, so they brought him to my mother and let him nurse my mother so he could be not passed like 4 or 5 of our other children already had at birth. That's how close neighbors were in them days. And I don't know if they're still that close or not, but I'm guessing not. Because the last time I was back there, most of those old farm homes were empty. They'd all moved to town. And
I don't think they're that close anymore. I haven't been over to nurse the neighbor lady in a long time.
yeah, we had 8 grades in one schoolhouse, and it had a basement. And the older kids, the teacher she would start teaching the minute she got out of high school, mind you, at 17 and 18. I think she had to take a test in the county or somewhere to be able to teach. But she'd take over those 8 grades, mind you, and some of those kids were like 15 and 16 years old because they had to stay on the farm to help make money. And can you imagine what kind of a teacher, what kind of a mess they had on their hands? And then us little kids, she'd send all the little kids in the basement, or maybe the first 3 grades, and then have one of the older, smarter girls come down and teach us while she taught the older kids.
Yeah.
We'd had to take our lunch, paper sack, or we had, we were lucky, we had a, mother would buy syrup in a can about so big around with veil.
Gallon
Red
Carol.
Carol syrup, and that was our lunch boxes.
Yeah.
See, we all remember that too. Some of us don't.
Yeah.
Well, her mom was one of the teachers. She
Yeah, that's
said
right.
She was like 16 and some
Yeah.
of the kids were head and shoulders
Yeah,
over
yeah.
her.
I remember
She said she was actually afraid of some of those boys.
I remember that. Remember her telling the story. Yeah.
And for entertainment, a lot of things, a lot of times there would be, I don't know
Yeah, then
how-
watch out what you're telling.
You guys are older than me. So you had more entertainment. Or did more entertainment. But we always had, everybody went to church back there, out in the old country, and there was a cemetery just right alongside the church. That's where our sisters were buried, and our grandparents, Thackeray's, and some of the Edwardses too, I guess.
Yeah, they are.
And the ladies would have sewing days, what they call it, missionary
yeah.
days. And they'd all meet at this church and maybe quilt a quilt or a lot of things like that. Every Christmas, of course, there was Children's Day in church. Or I think they had every day they could think of, to Mother's Day, Father's Day. We all had to learn little scriptures and get up and recite. And then at school, we all had a Christmas party, Christmas program we put on. And that was always fun. We always got new clothes for that. That was worth a lot, because it came from Sears and Roebuck's catalog,
Oh, we got her.
as a rule.
And that one-room schoolhouse, didn't Mother go to that schoolhouse?
That kind of
I
thing.
think Mother
I
went
think
to
Dad
it.
did
Lived
too.
across the
I don't remember Dad.
I think
Mother
Dad
did.
said he went to that school.
But anyway, that one-room schoolhouse,
Huh?
What was the name of that school?
Dundee County, District 22.
District 22.
Your mother went to Hoover's.
Hoover was.
Some of them got names. We got Dundee County number
Yeah.
22.
But anyway, what I was gonna say about that one-room schoolhouse, when we graduated from the 8th grade, and we're 12 miles from the courthouse,
I remember that story you told me.
yeah, we had to go to the county courthouse in Mickelman, Nebraska, to take our exam to pass through the 8th grade. And I remember in that room, and they get a spelling. The first word was exhibit, and exhibit was up on the side of the wall. So I knew I got that one right.
Yeah, that was
Very few boys went on to high school.
That's right.
Very few boys went
I
on to
went
high
into
school.
the 9th grade, left there in my freshman year, come out there and went no further.
And
I
almost
figured I
all
was
the
smart
girls,
enough.
almost all the girls got married the day after high school graduation. and started their families, and believe it or not, they lasted. My mother was 15 on August the 27th.
Yep.
And she got married at 15 on November 13th. And
1913.
they lived till Dad died in 80 together. They had a lot of fights, well, mouth fights.
Yeah.
Word fights. But I don't think, well, Dad couldn't have afforded to let divorce Mother. Too many kids did.
And she had her first baby 1 year. Dad was born because when Dad was 4, he proceeded to tell some relatives that he was only born so many days
Yeah.
after their
A week after the.
a week after they were married.
Yeah.
And he literally
He
got,
left out that year.
that was a no-no.
My mother heard that
21st, right?
conversation.
Huh?
21st?
Yes.
Yeah.
21st November, yeah.
Mom heard that conversation because a lot of them got married. I think about 4 cousins of Dad's, and them got married at basically the same time, and that meant they all had these kids all at the same time. So they, of course, they joined and had lots of togetherness. Mom overheard Leonard telling me, yeah, Mom and Dad was only married from the 13th to the 21st, whatever that would have been. My mom says the minute them kids left, I brought that boy in and I sure straightened him out. Because she was so young at 15.
Grandpa told me a story. Grandpa and Grandma, because we lived in Canby, would come over and spend time visiting with me. Especially if we had a foster baby that was living, then I would hear those kind of stories.
Yeah.
But one time, and you guys might know this story, they were at school and the corn was high. The upper boys, Dad, Chuck, Don, I don't know the order of them, decided they didn't want to go to school that day. And one of them hid in the corn. And when they went in, the teacher did roll call and they said, "Where's that one?" They go, "Oh, he started with us." They had an all community search then. And finally, Grandpa said, "I got to thinking, that sounds like something my boys would pull." And he rounded them up and got his own kids to admit one was hiding so they didn't have to go to school. And he said, "I am telling you, they all went to the barn." And they never pulled it again. I have such a rich heritage because my grandparents spent so much time at my house, and a lot of times it was, no, Edna, it was not a blue Ford, it was green. How dare you say it was green? It was orange or whatever car. And they'd go and then would forget what they were going to tell us because they were trying to decide what color the car was. So I have story upon story upon story in my being. It's my hallmark moments.
I remember it was my folks, they run a lot of cattle and stuff, plus milk cows and stuff. And we had a tank, a cement tank, that's probably 16 or at least square, probably about that deep. And the cattle would come up there and drink. And the old bull, he would be in there drinking with them. Well, Don, Chuck, and I think it was Cliff. While the cows and the old bull was side by side drinking, the boys went over there and they tied their tails together.
Yeah.
Well, about the time they got full of drinking and started back away, that old bull, whoa, something's touching me. Well, he heaved like that, you know, and he pulled the milk cow, pulled her tail off about that far. She had about that much of a stub on the top. Well, they couldn't stop, they couldn't get the bull. You know, he was smelling, he smelled like blood and everything. He was fit to be tied. Well, Dad was gone. When Dad come home, well, I guess you know what hit the fan.
The other time, Dad had a bunch of steers ready to sell, battened out. And those same 3 kids and probably some more cousins were there. Anyway, here they went out and they decided they'd play cowboy. And they was out riding those steers.
Oh, yeah.
My Dad come home and here, Dad said, "Oh my God, there went money off of them cattle."
Playing rodeo.
Who tied the ones to the windmill? Do you guys know the story on that?
Well, I know that we had the windmill there, it pumped all the water for the cattle and the home and everything, and I think it was Dawn or one of them, it was probably Dawn. He climbed up there and they had to walk around all the way up there. He got up there and he'd dive off into the snow, you know. And that was up there, you know, quite a ways. Snow was that deep. Well, there's a picket fence there, but he'd only miss it that far, but he had no fear. That was, get up there and jump off of that window. Yeah.
Don was our accident family.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
I mean, my mother knew how to know he could go to a doctor. So she would make us pray for him. And then to get his strength, she would put a little bit of sand in a little bucket and have him carry that each day, add a little more till Don could get strength enough to be able to, whatever he wanted to do. Can't get words.
Yeah.
I think he had the crookedest arm of anybody. Donnie knows that. Your dad had a very crooked arm.
Well, yeah, each arm broke, I don't know,
Yeah.
3 or 4 times.
Oh, yeah.
Each of them, you know.
Always, he loved to ride his horse.
Yeah.
Chuck, wasn't it?
Chubb, Little Tony, and yours was in the May. I mean, Rainbow.
Yeah.
That Shelton was
Yeah.
yours. That
Yeah,
Rainbow,
well,
yeah.
we rode horses to school that day, this one day, and Ralph and I was on this stubborn Rainbow Shotland. So Lauren was ahead of us on his horse, and Lauren, somehow his horse didn't want to go, so Ralph says, he rides up alongside with me behind Ralph, and Ralph says, kick him! So I kicked him, well by damn, that horse kicked back, and I still got it marked on my shield where that horse kicked me. And of course, his horse jumped. Oh, God. We had more fun. We'd always fight at we'd walk that first half mile, wasn't it, to Alroy's place. And then the other families, we'd tease the daylights out of that.